Now, sometimes when you get your reference, you're going to have a model that isn't exactly who you're looking for. And not that I'm going to do a makeover on this guy right now, but it's more about obviously approaching this with Bridgman's mechanisms in mind, his machination of the human form, and trying not to get too caught up in in this case, the complacency of the muscles, but to try to push them a little bit, to give them a bit more vigor, give them a little bit more punch, so that the picture has a little more going on in it. And this is good reference, and he is definitely a cut person, but it's not a very active pose. He's definitely just standing there with the spear, and it doesn't feel like he's in the middle of action. And so in order to push it in the storytelling direction, we need to push it a little bit overall in the structure. So starting with the armature shapes that I usually teach in my anatomy courses, I'm going to begin with the torso. And I'm not going to go through all the same steps. I'm not going to put the skeleton in, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to do that, especially if you're reinventing something, just to really get the core of where everything is going to be anchored. Put back here, this leg a little bit more, maybe push it over this way just a little bit further, making sure that the feet are at least in the same position to each other, so one foot is out in front of the other. And then with the arms, I'll push this arm out just a little bit more off to the side. Give it a little bit more action or activity. Again, rather than it being so calm or in a calm position. And the thumbs I'll have to question as well as I continue developing and sculpting the pose. This hand, starting with the block shape of the fingers and then going to the palm, the upper and the lower. I'm going to push the head over just a little bit more to the left. And then as far as the pillow shape goes, I probably also want to lift that head up just a little bit higher. Or do I want to bring it down into the shoulders more? Right? I have to think about that as far as the action goes. I think I'm going to bring it into the shoulders just a little bit more. Then I'm going to find the rhythm of the trapezius muscle, the S curve of the pose, so the pelvis is facing more towards us. And I'm going to give this leg a little bit more angle to kick it back behind him. And rotate the foot because the foot is in the wrong position as far as rotation goes. Maybe even bring this arm up just a little bit higher or further out to the side of his body. The angle here and the angle here I'm going to share. The angle down here I'm going to share. The S curve is the rotation of the shoulders against the rotation of the hips. And in fact, the shoulders are more square to us. So this would be more, I'm going to reroute this. And the pelvis is going to be rotated a little bit further away from us. So this is going to be showing more of the side here, where the torso is going to be a little more centered up on the pose. And then the spear shape for the hands, so that the hands have something to grip around. I'm going to move this out a little bit farther. Since I move the arm, I do have to move the hand a little bit as well. And then I'm going to remove a bunch of the lines that don't really need to be in the picture anymore, just to remove confusion. And that's always a good idea. When you're sketching, it's one thing to just sketch away and put a bunch of lines into the picture, but it's another thing to have visual clarity. It's really easy to lose that visual clarity. There's a nice rhythm through here, which carries over a little bit into the forearm. And rotating the forearm out a little bit, which means I might even bring this arm out just a little bit more, foreshortening this just a bit more than usual, so that they both are roughly similar to one another at their distance from the torso. Side plane of the head, His head tilt is this way, so I'm going to keep that, even though I brought it down into the torso a little bit. All right, now looking for a few key elements on the torso, where the pectoralis muscles insert into the arms, where the shoulders are in reference, since that muscle is going to be more blocked through the form. This is going to be more rhythmical through the form. The bicep will be somewhere right around in here for this arm, and somewhere over here for this arm. Make the torso just a little bit narrower to give him more girth across this area. Cut that ribcage shape into the form. And then his clothing covers the lower half through here, out along here, over this leg, and up into the other hip. Now I'm going to straighten this out a little bit because it's a bit too bent to the side, and I'd rather it be bent forward towards us. So that means that this is going to have more turn to it here than this leg is. This is going to be a much flatter ellipse, and this is going to be a more opened up ellipse. All right, so now pushing this curve, pushing this bowling pin shape through here, really making sure that it accentuates the muscular rhythms. And then I'm going to chisel away at those shapes as well, giving some more angularity to the muscles that are active, that are more active than the muscles that are passive. And this is not like a comic book where every muscle is going to be activated. There's specific muscles to activate. The forearms especially, since they're the ones that are gripping the spear, and the forearm flexors are going to be strengthy, as well as the strengthy. They're going to be stronger looking. They're going to be more chiseled, where the upper arm could also have that in it, because we could really force the strength into the entire upper torso. The tricep, though, is going to be the more relaxed muscle. It's because it's not extending the arm, it's assisting in the flexion of the arm. Clavicles come down through here. The abdominal wall, I'm going to go ahead and draw three of the four muscles visible. This one, this one, this one. They're more visible to the eye. The rhythm lines through those. On the forearm, I'm going to split this mass up here from this mass down along through here. The extensor mass from the rotation mass. I want to make sure that both biceps have the tendon cut a little more visible. The brachioradialis is also flexing, so that's going to be a strong rhythm through here. And then the bowling pin rhythm, with the ulna bone cutting through this part right along in here. And that's the same with the ulna bone through here, making sure that it cuts through this area. Now the legs aren't all that visible, but what is showing, I also want to make sure it has strength to it. So the quadricep muscle, pushing the adductor, then the overlap of the rest of the quad on the other side of the kneecap. And then over here on this side, the kneecap is going to be strong with both the medial and lateral lateralis and vastus medialis muscles sharpening the shapes up above the cap before the costume covers the rest of the leg. And then a nice rhythm line through here, bringing our eye up back to the hands where the anger portion of it is going to be. Then with the head, we look for the baseline of the nose, the cheek plane, bring this back for the baseline of the ear, so both of those stay in line with each other. Chisel the cheekbones further, find the brow and push that a little bit more, and probably pull his hair back this way into some kind of ponytail shape. Strong jaw, heavier neck, heavier sternocleidomastoid muscle, the brow ridge, smaller eyes, nose rhythm. The muzzles sort of disappeared here, and I'll have to find that again. Create the cut lines on this. Then the cut lines are the leather that's underneath and the belt that sits over the top, right along in here. The belt rhythm as it flies off this way. Calf muscle group up and over the kneecap, so it looks like it's inserting into the back of the leg behind the knee, like it should be. Calf muscle group on this leg. And I draw the rhythms of those muscles in because they influence the material that sits on top, just like the quadriceps influence the material. And we have fold lines across here coming off of this leg that's dropping back to the other. Well, actually coming forward towards this one. So these are going up and over this leg, but these are dropping off of this one. And all the wrinkly stuff in there I'm not going to pay attention to. That's just too much of a visual distraction. The piece of leather here is going to line up with the center line of his torso through here. And these are going to also aim towards the center of the figure. The obliques here and over here. And then as those obliques cut into the torso along here, this one's a very strong one. This one's strong. The abdominal wall cuts downward this way, so it narrows as it drops. And then we're going to think about all the cuts. So in order to do all of that, I want to switch over to another layer. So that's the under layer, the armature layer. So now for all of the main drawing, I'm going to start thinking in terms of plane structure. So the planes across here. In fact, I'm going to drop the pectoralis muscles down a little bit. They're a little too high up. I didn't compensate for the perspective since he is leaning it forward a little bit more. I'm going to drop this down a little bit more. I'm going to drop this one down a little bit more, and this one's going to be sharper through here because this arm is elevating while this one is back. Bicep comes out farther. Going to look for the break between the bicep and the brachialis through here. Going to look for the break along the deltoid through here and here. So all of this is overcut. Bring the lat out a little farther. Going to look for the striations up through here. The striation along here is going to be sharper on both muscles. Clavicle rhythm, which isn't really going to be that noticeable because the muscles dominate the space. Tricep in the back. I don't want to over chisel it. I just want to make sure that the muscle head is a nice rhythm to this one. So this is low and this is high in comparison, rhythmically offsetting them. Both the rotator muscles, as this comes forward towards the wrist, strong elbow shape in here, and then a strong angle across here. The extensor muscle group as it crosses that line of the bone to strengthen that, and then a strong rhythm through here where the thumb will go. Play with the knuckles so that they have a bit of strength to them. I'm going to zoom in a little bit now. Think a little more up close, especially for the small areas like the fingers, where I need to carve into these just a little bit more, giving the middle finger more strength just by giving it more angles. Rolling these back just a tiny bit because none of these knuckles line up with each other. Thumb shape, and then the portions of the spear that intersect the hand. The rhythms of the first abdominal muscle. Sharper shapes through here. Sharper shapes through here, mostly in the shadow pattern or the tonal pattern shapes. The muscles themselves, especially in certain parts of this, I need to curve more. So there's a combination of straights and curves. I'm going to curve this line a little bit more over here, especially because of its angle, to our eye. The bicep, a little bit stronger through here. Corner on this side. Straights versus curves. A couple more angles through here. Sharpen the elbow shape. I'm going to reverse this curve, making sure that I don't push a concave. Concave shapes are going to weaken the form. They're not going to strengthen the form. This passes behind the bicep. Bring this into the clavicle. Push the sternocleidomastoid muscle through here and through the rhythm along in here. Ear shape above that. Rhythm through here. Rhythm line over here. We're not going to see as much of the information over on this side, but there's still going to be small rhythms in there from the muscle striations. This side is going to have a little more angularity, where this side's going to have a little more stretch. Make sure that that rib cage shape is seen through here, straights versus curves, even through the forms. The undercut along here from this striation of the latissimus. And then the thumb over on this side sort of suffices for the other side of that ribcage rhythm. Now I'm drawing straight through the spear on these shapes, so I'm not drawing around the spear. This is draw through, just like we would do a draw through on the actual figure itself. Regardless of what parts of the body you're showing and which aren't, we want to be really mindful to not let things interfere with others, just like with the legs. Just because the cloth is covering up the legs doesn't mean that I could ignore this information down here and push this even further. The undercut along here. The knee rhythm with the tendon. Because this is angled back, I want to make sure that this gets pushed under this side into the tendon as that drops down to the tibia. And then this side I don't have to get too caught up in, but I may end up using some of the rhythms in the cloth as part of, like, do I push folds like this to strengthen the muscles, or do I push those folds straight across? Since this one is coming down at an angle, I think I can get away with more angles like that across the form. Going to lift this up and over the leg a little bit on this side before bringing it back into the material through here. Angle this out away from the leg, and then find the wraps, the leather that's falling over it along here, exaggerating the shapes a little bit. Bringing these shapes down and around the calf muscle group so that I don't end up burying the leg into obscurity. Tapering this around the ankle. Let this sit across the top of the foot, and when I do, I want to bring it up and over that foot as well. Strengthen the pinky toe side, find the big toe over here, and then find the other two rhythms through here of the other two toes. Then bring in the foot straps. But again, the foot needs to be drawn more importantly than the straps of the shoe. The heel strap. Those are second or secondary to the rhythms of the toes. Bring this back to the heel. And then bring this back behind the leg. And then find what other leather straps you want to use to wrap this with. I'm going to push the belt rhythm, but I'm not going to let it dangle off of the body too much the way that his is. I want him to fill the space. This goes around the hip this way. This goes around the hip this way. And I'm lifting this just as much as I'm lifting this over here. The oblique rhythm over here as well. Navel. The lower ab through here. This abdominal wall sitting above. Pushing this rhythm a little bit, just so they're not all absolutely the same. The abdominal rhythm over here. A hint of this through here, but I don't want that one to clash too much with the spear. So I'm just making sure that the rhythms are counter to the spear, just like over here, the same thing. I want to push this up and over so the spear and it don't blend together once they're drawn together. Fold lines, a bigger pipe fold through here as it sort of lifts up over the leg. The tie of the belt through here, smaller strap, and then the larger strap. This one will end somewhere right around here. This one will end somewhere right around here, making sure that they also don't parallel each other, but radiate. Vastus medialis, the vastus lateralis. The kneecap over here will be a little bit sharper through here and here. Going around the knee. I think this needs to come out a little bit farther this way so the leg doesn't buckle inward. I'm thinking about the rhythm of this leg like this. And this one is going to have a little bit more of an angle to it. Down into the calf muscle as that takes on the rhythm of the cloth. Tighten this up against the leg just so it doesn't hang off too much. And the leather falls over this one pretty hard. In fact, can take advantage of the shape of that to create the shape of the gastrocnemius muscle in here. And if you look back at all the old masters, the golden age of illustration, they did this a lot. They would use implied lines to show what's happening underneath the cloth and what's passing through the body, as opposed to just drawing random shapes that don't really reflect that movement or motion. They used it to help strengthen the design underneath. Implied lines. Some of the straps across the foot here. Looks like it laps over like this in a weird way here. Make clean rhythms out of this side. Maybe push a couple of the zigzag folds over on this side. Let that lap over the foot. Turn this foot outward just a little bit more, making sure to chisel the heel, chisel the big toe, swing the toes out this way, and actually that whole line, all of this can drop down just a little bit to about right there. The big toe shape here. 1 cut, 2 cuts, 3 cuts, pinky toe. Bring this back into the ankle over here. Lift this, rest this against the foot. Find the straps that go up and over, straps that go up and over, the heel, the sole of the shoe, making sure to keep that nice and angular. And with these legs so different to one another, it might be a good idea to push this knee out just a little bit farther. And I'm going to use the actual shapes that I've already drawn. That's the beauty of digital painting, is that you have a lot of flexibility in how you control what you do. Where with traditional materials, you would have to redraw it. Change the angle of the kneecap so it goes more in line with this leg bending. And then make sure that this outside edge over here has just a little bit more angle to it through here. That flexes his knee just a little bit farther than before. Finish off the rhythm lines in the abdominal wall. Push the striations through the oblique even harder. This side, it's going to get a little bit noisy. Shadow pattern I can push here. I can push up along through here. And all of this can drop into shadow through this space. Cast shadow over here. I'm just going to go true to the lighting that we have for now. Otherwise, I'm going to open up a conversation about invented lighting, which is also something that you would do. But for this instance, it's more about pushing Bridgman's thought process as far as cutting shapes and strengthening shapes. Side of the hand, pinky finger, cut 1, cut 2, cut 3. And I have to be careful about how I choose to angle those fingers, because the more I push all 3 of the joints, the lighter his grip. And I want this to have a fairly strong grip to it. And then the index finger. If I also do this, it's got that sort of Marvel Comics dancer feel to the hands. Todd McFarlane would push that a lot, where the fingers would be bent a certain way, the wrist would be bent, and then there would always be one finger that's off angle. And he would call that more dynamic, but sometimes that dynamicism doesn't necessarily work well. It softens the grip rather than strengthens the grip. So it might be a good idea also to lift these up a little bit higher here. And then I have to think about the lengths of each finger and where the fingers are bending in relationship to each other, which I'll come back to here in just a moment. So I have to be mindful of the rhythm through here. Flexor group comes from here. And then the cut along here as it passes up and over the bicep. Shadow pattern over here. Shadow pattern along here. Push the tendon rhythm. Push the tonal pattern down along through here and over here. This whole side of the arm is in fact going to go into shadow. Right along the flexor group. There's going to be an undercut along here. And then I'm going to lift the head up just a tiny bit because it does feel a little too planted into the shoulders. But first what I'll do is I'll draw it in the location and then I'll lengthen it slightly. Pull the chiseled lines out on the far side muzzle, the nose, the brow line, the frown line on both sides of the muzzle, the smaller eye shapes to increase the scale of the head. And we could give him a bit of a scowl. Pull the hair back tight, let it push a few more angles across the top of the skull. That ear's up too high. Need to bring that down a little bit more in line here. Cheekbone structure. As that rhythm goes back into the ear shape, the zygote. In fact, I'm just going to move all of that out of the way again for a sec. Pull this back. Pull this around to the other side of his head so we don't have a big long flowing line over here. Find the chin. Then take all of this shape and lift it up a little bit higher. Take that underlayer and remove it for now. Remove these measuring lines that cut into the face. Then lengthen the sternocleidomastoideus muscle. Bring in the trapezius up along through here to show the anchor point. The ear could fall back just a little farther here, giving the jaw just a tiny bit more length through this part. Drop the chin down a little bit more if I'm going to open the mouth up. Rhythm line up and over the nose. And then, of course, find the cheekbone on this side. So there's a relationship between the cheekbones on both sides. And all the hair gets pulled back like this. Maybe even find beard shape to push over all of this. And if I wanted to get one of those little Viking tails going on here, I'm going to push this dark so we can see the change of value. In fact, maybe even cut away the sides a little bit and push the hair shape across the top of the skull, mostly in here. Maybe even rotate this away from us a little farther to turn the head more, but give the rest of it its length. Darken all of this, darken all of this so the shapes are more visible. Drop the brow a little bit. Push that secondary muzzle rhythm. Finish the spear out in length over here. Round it out so it has form to it, just like everything else. You don't want anything in here to be too graphic. The leather on the other side, so we know that it goes two sides on this. And this actually comes down and intersects in here. And all of this is going to go darker. First pass is just to give it tone. Second pass is going to give it form. So cross over here against the leg. Through here. I'm going to turn this dimensionally. There's that small piece underneath here that I was going to line up with the center line of the body. Go darker under here, getting lighter as it comes out this way. Push the roundness of these forms, pinch this over here. Push the lines over here to roll the form, push the lines over here to roll the form. Embellish the shadow along here. Embellish the shadow along here. So giving the pipe fold a little bit more roll. And then do the same thing with the leggings. First pass is just going to be to give it value. Same with the shoes. Then once it has its tonal range, then push the zigzags and the half locks, if there are any. Side of the leg over here. I'm going to push a rhythm through here to block out the calf muscle group. Then over here, the same thing. Find the half locks. Push those. Push this side of the leg into shadow. With the kneecap, it's kind of the same thing. Push the shadow pattern across the cap, under the cap, above on the vastus lateralis. Over here, push this shadow on the side of the cap. Secondary fold across here. Another fold through here, continuing the radii. Side plane of the skull along here. The brow. It's too small to get into teeth, so I'm going to forget about trying to get the mouth to show detail. This is going to be casting shadow across here. And then the side of his neck in the photograph does have shadow coming down through these muscles. Up and over this part of his trapezius. Side plane of his nose. Side plane of his eyeball and eye socket. That eye's more in light than this side is. Striations in the deltoid. Striations through the pectoralis. Shadow pattern on this pectoralis. Push the shadow patterns over here just a little bit deeper. Undercut of the bicep. Then really start to think about the rhythms of the contour a little bit more. For side-to-side action across the figure. Because it's really easy to isolate muscles into their own individual spaces. And that's when things really start to break apart. The underside of these fingers. These fingers, I want to curve this up and over just a little bit more through here and here to give both halves of the hand more rhythm. Going to create the bridge between the knuckle and the finger across here. The underside of the arm over here drops into shadow. going to clean up through the spear. And there's a few other rhythms in here that need to be cleaned up. Bring this down against the skull just a little bit more. Center this on his face. Really make sure that there's a nice continuity down along through here. Over here, this is a bit too straight. It should help. We should push that rhythm of the muscle through there a little bit more. And that's going to help create more of a rhythm between the two sides like this. I'm going to drop this side into halftone more. I'm going to drop some shadow across here from the cast of the arm. Push the undersides of these just a little bit further. Give them a bit more strength. And then wherever any of the shadows are, I'm just going to make sure that they're a bit more solidified. Make sure that this is hanging off of the leg. In fact, this whole side of the leg is going to be in shadow as well. Push the curvature over here, curvature over here, angles here, curves over here. Cheekbone on the far side, I might even lift up just a tiny bit. Bring that in just to balance the two sides out a little better. Rhythm up and over to clean up that shape. And I'm going to clean up these shapes a little bit through here as well. Top of the lines, I'm going to thin out a little bit more just to give them more light on them until I get to the shadow side. And so in taking Bridgman's information, when you wonder how like comic book artists push what they push, or you wonder how the old illustrators did what they did, they didn't have the perfect models, but they had a plan because they were trained in how to push things. And if they had Bridgman as a teacher, which a lot of them did, then there's going to be a game plan for making things look a lot stronger. Right? And the old masters also thought about a more masculine versus a more feminine look, and finding a certain set of rhythms and a certain set of shapes that would identify one over the other, or one from the other, I should say, not one over the other. Or if we want to modernize this, a more aggressive look from a less aggressive look. And we're pushing aggression by pushing more angularity, by taking the muscle rhythms that are actually there and increasing them. Pushing the planar structure through the skull. And so, again, taking what you have, but then pushing it farther so that it gives you something a little bit more in terms of a story to tell. Now, the one thing that's really bugging me here is I think this eye is up too high, out of alignment with the other one, and I'm going to bring it down a little bit more through here. And the little crisscrossy stuff here I need to be careful about as well. It's creating an awkward design in the brow ridge. Drop all this into a halftone. So when I thicken these lines, it's to move them into a slightly different position. And then I can come back in and sculpt into them a little better. Got to be careful with this not to become a vertical. Don't want any awkward angles on the figure that stand out too much. Angles of horizontality and verticality would really slow things down a little bit more. So everything needs to have some kind of angular quality to it to put it into some kind of action space. Maybe bring that elbow out a little bit more over here. Push the curvature over there a little bit further. Get rid of any rhythm lines or extension lines that break rhythms. Like, I know I did this to show the direction of the radiation, but it's also starting to break the forms. I'm going to knock those back. Push this against the hip, closer to the hip, closer to the hip. Make sure that this looks like it's going around the hip. Curvature or angularity, angles, making sure that there are no parallels, but that everything has radiation to it. Getting this to feel like it's going around the hip. And do keep in mind that this is like embellishment, so it doesn't end here. This is going to keep going and going until every little tiny spot is polished to the story, whatever the story may be. Which I don't have one here, so my priority here is just to kind of show how Bridgman-esque modeling can help redefine your reference so that it gives it more strength, or it gives it more action or more mechanism, more machination to it. This needs to lift over here. And I'm going to go ahead and terminate this demo here in just a sec. There's just a few more things that I want to do while still on camera, just to kind of show. Cleaning up a few areas. Maybe even thin the soles of the shoes a little bit. Bring them in a little tighter to the feet. And then with the toes, making sure that the toes have this kind of a feel to it, where they're really hammered into the floor, firmly planted on the floor. Bring this foot out just a little farther over here. Angle the heels just a tiny bit more to give the back of the foot just as much strength as the front of the foot. That would be pushing the design structure of Bridgman's thinking into the reference that you're working with, to bring it into the story. Because like I said in the beginning of this, you're going to have reference sometimes where you have a friend pose for you. And maybe that friend isn't going to be like a bodybuilder, but gives you a pretty decent pose. It's then up to you to take that pose and embellish it. But how do you do that? Well, if you're trained with enough knowledge that helps you push it, and that would be studying Bridgman and studying the Riley abstraction, construction drawing, pushing and developing the rhythmical connection between the parts of the body, and doing enough practice with that you feel comfortable with the tools. You don't have to be an expert anatomist, but understanding where everything goes, and then understanding the concepts of straights, of rhythms, pushing planes, and understanding flow and rhythm, and that angle, vertical and horizontal, kill movement, but angles of any kind create movement. And radiation lines are also doing that same thing. That's another form of pushing the dynamicism. All of these things together help make it easier to push and pull on the shapes that you've been given that may or may not be story worthy, but give you the opportunity to add that story to it. So I hope this has been a little bit helpful in terms of where you can go with things. Once you start to learn the information, you can really push that information. And you can have a really good time in the drawing process. You can freak out a little bit about not having the best reference, But then you can find something or anything online that embellishes or gives you a pose that you can work with so that you can embellish it. And like I said, having a good game plan of how to do that through the studies of the artists that I mention are like Bridgman is a good example, really helps give you something to work from. I mean, his information may be a little bit hard to understand in the book, but when you look at what he's doing with the planar structure and the design of everything, that should give you enough information that you can work from and do the same thing. Now, your drawing isn't always going to happen in one go. It might take several before you start to see what it should look like. And there's nothing wrong with that either. That's the part of the exploration process. The more that you can not get freaked out about this stuff, but actually experiment, the sooner you're going to find the answers that you're looking for and build that picture the way that you need it for whatever purpose you're trying it's trying to serve, for your illustrations, for the work that you do. So again, I hope this demonstration sort of helped shed some light on that process of where you can go with things. All right. Look for the last few chapters of the Studying from Bridgman guide coming soon on the arms and legs and on the hands. And thank you for coming along on this demonstration.